All right. If you've made it this far, and I don't know how many of you have now reached the last section. Um, that is one of the things I worry about. I make these only 10 minutes, which means there's lots of videos to look at, and maybe that's discouraging. But you can come and go as you please. I get that. But the last one, the geographical perspectives. Every chapter kind of ends with this GT perspective, looking at maybe a specific case study, an example. So, one of the things that I want to stress in this class is we are going to talk about issues that may be controversial. There may be differing opinions. We're going to be talking a lot about things like climate change, uh, environmental racism, things that may be controversial or confusing. This class is based first and foremost in the scientific method, right? This idea of a scientific truth that we can all at least agree upon. Um, Opinions can come from that on how to deal with it, how the data is collected, but at the basis, we are going to be looking at the data. So if you haven't had introduction to the scientific method, this may be a first for you. I'm going to assume that all of you have at least heard of this. But let's apply the scientific method to the case of Easter Island. So Easter Island right here, or in the native Polynesian at Rapa Nui, right here, one of the most remote human settlements on Earth. The nearest large city over here is almost 4,000 miles away in Argentina, and the nearest other people at all are in the Pitcairn Islands at about maybe 2,000 miles away. And when I say nearest, by the way, this is open ocean, and there's only 40 people living here. So this is about as far away as you can get from anywhere else on the Earth. And Polynesians settled this, we think, roughly about the year, I want to say 1200, give or take. Europeans came through in the 1700s, and when they first came upon it, it was Easter Sunday. They called it Easter Island. But when they got there, they found this enduring mystery. These large statues carved out of the local volcanic rock. The rock is from the center of the island. These were carved and then moved all the way across the island to the coast where they stare out over the sea. Now, the reason this was a mystery was the natives they encountered at the time had no major technology to do this. They did not have wheeled instruments. They were a very much a hunter-gatherer tribe. They didn't even have boats at this point. There were no forests on the island. They were just basically farming and living off of the small animals and plant populations there. There was no visible way they saw that they could have moved these huge, several ton structures from the interior to the coast. And so for many years, people thought that, well, obviously that must mean aliens had did this. But when we apply the scientific method, we get a different point. So the scientific method has these various steps, right? It starts with observations and questions. You develop this idea of what you think might have happened. Then you go and you collect data, verifiable data from the environment. And then you use that data to either test and either support your initial thought or reject it. And then you build upon that. Someone else takes what you did and goes further. So let's go into this in more detail. So, when it came to Easter Island, the initial observation was these stone statues. How were these statues moved? Because these Europeans could not see any way that could have been done. There were no cranes and no huge forests. How could that have done? So one of the things they did was scientists would dig down and they would collect samples of soil under the ground that were basically created when those statues were moved. And one thing they found was that there was these different types of pollen in the dirt that differed from the modern dirt. And what I mean is this. Animals like us don't really give off pollen. Only plants do. Pollen is basically plant seeds. If you ever had hay fever, you know exactly what pollen is. Every plant's pollen is different. So if you dig down to a layer that you know is 200 years old of dirt, and you see a lot of pollen for pine trees, that tells you that 200 years ago there must have been pine trees to create that pollen. Now, if you take a current pollen count and there's no pine trees, or you see no pine trees, then you can figure out that something happened between 200 years ago and now that the trees were eliminated. And that's exactly what they did. They found a vast difference in the amount of tree pollen from ancient soil sites. And so that led to this idea that the trees on the island were cut down to make rollers. And they would lay the statues down and roll these statues from the center of the island, just like rolling on a skate, to the ocean. And to test that, they actually brought some logs to the island, made a fake statue of the same weight, and it worked. So this led to their idea that in the rush to build these statues around the islanders cut down most of their wood, most of their forests. Now, this was a problem because if you cut down the forests, the trees take a while to grow back. You also make the areas the trees grow more susceptible to erosion, and the soil washes away. Many things that we're going to talk about with environmental degradation. In other words, to build these statues, they cut down the forest, and in doing so, they degraded their local environment to the point where they could no longer build more statues. They also lost the ability to build boats because all the wood was gone, and the soil that was left behind was not as fertile. They could not grow as much food, so society kind of collapsed and reverted to a more primitive state. So that has led to several other studies to look at this, to look for other evidence of this. It's a controversial statement because there is some evidence that does not support this, but there is some that does. And so that is one of the things about scientific method. It isn't foolproof because it's based on this, the idea of a hypothesis. And a hypothesis and a thesis, a lot of people get confused, or a theory. I have a theory. Now, if you're saying to your friend, I have a theory that I failed this class because my professor was a jerk, that's your best guess. May or may not be true. In science, a theory is something that is constructed from many hypotheses. So the theory of evolution, it isn't just a guess that animals evolved. The theory of evolution is based on many hypotheses that have been tested. So let's talk about a testable idea. What is a testable idea? The Green Bay Packers are the best football team in the NFL. Is that testable? That's kind of an opinion, isn't it? Right? I like green better than orange. Can you test that? I like green, but maybe you don't. But that's not a hypothesis. That's an opinion. A hypothesis would be the Green Bay Packers have won more NFL championships than any other team. Can you test that? You can find the data, and yes, they won 14 championships. The Chicago Bears have more players in the National Football League Hall of Fame than any other team. That's a testable hypothesis, right? So you have all these hypotheses that you test, and they have to be something that you can either prove or disprove. The data would suggest yes, the data would suggest no. And these build theories. So the theory of evolution, we have hypotheses about how different animals and different plants have evolved over time that we found evidence that supports it. So it's based on many, many theories. But the best thing here is this. They are tested, and let me get my mouse over here, supported by the available evidence. So if I said that the Green Bay Packers are the best team in football because they have the most championships, but we could not prove that. We did not have access to the records. That's a hard to prove thing. But now we get access to the records of the NFL, and now we have it. So right now, we talk about Easter Island. And a lot of people have said that the island collapsed because of the overuse of the forest. They cut down the forest. They degraded the environment. Society collapsed. There's a lot of evidence that supports that, but we have found some evidence that may not support it. It depends on how you interpret it. So if something happens, if we find something that says that evolution does not happen, a theory or hypothesis is tested that says, no, this is actually not how it happens, that can be tested, then that theory has to be revised. So in other words, with science, you can never say with 100% accuracy, this is how things are. What you can say is, based on the available evidence, this is how things are. Before we had microscopes and magnifying glasses, we could not see germs. They were too small for the naked eye. So we could not actually see them. So scientists who thought about the germs as an actual action of causing disease couldn't really prove it. They couldn't see the germs themselves. Once we had the data, we could actually see small single-celled germ organisms and what they did. That allowed us to support the idea that germs cause disease, right? But what if we found some type of data that isn't the germs? Maybe we'll have new technology that will determine that. Who knows? Now, a lot of times you have these theories You have many different theories, right, that explain things. But maybe there's a theory that connects all of them. They call it the unifying theory. So we'll use the example of plate tectonics. We're going to talk about that halfway through the semester, in this case, like in 4 weeks. But plate tectonics is this explanation of how, over the time, the Earth's surface has changed. And it explains things like earthquakes and volcanoes and evolution and global climate. It unifies many things. They call that a unifying theory. And the last thing I'll leave you with is this idea of scientific law. So we hear about the law of evolution or the law of gravity. These are theories that are so strongly supported by various hypotheses that nobody who is reasonable thinks we're going to find something that will refute it. For instance, gravity as a scientific law is pretty much established that things will be gravitationally attracted. Now, that's not saying that maybe we will find something in the future that proves it wrong. But for now, it's a pretty strong law. So we actually call that a scientific law. It doesn't mean that it is 100% truth. It's just such a strongly supported theory that we really don't think it's ever going to change. So that's kind of what I have for you on this lecture. This is roughly the way lectures are going to go from now on, 10-minute chunks. You are more than free to not watch them or watch them. I hope you do. And as always, you can take notes, come back. If you have questions, let me know. But thank you very much for watching, and have a good whatever time of day it is for you.